to get right into it, one of the things that we think about, or what is the talking character? Talking characters are usually these characters that are brought in or added to a show or to a movie or whatever, and they're there really to say that there is diversity, really to say that, oh, you know, we have this black character, so we can kind of talk about black things. We have this Asian character, so we can discuss Asian things. We have this queer character, this trans character, so we can talk about these types of things. And it's really, the way it's been used a lot is really, is diversity for diversity's sake. Because many of these characters do not have their own agency outside of the white main character. You know, if the white man, if they're not on screen with the white main character, we're usually not going to see them. We're not going to see what they're up to in their lives. We're not going to see what it is that they're doing. We're just, you know, they have to be on screen with the white character to thus be a thing, to be important. And that's really, that can be really disheartening when you continue to only show that type of that type of idea, that someone has to be, it has to be important only when they're juxtaposed to this other particular character. And you know, we've seen this throughout history. In fact, even, you know, thinking about the speculative genre of horror, you literally have the token character who, they are usually going to be something like the best friend. And if they are the best friend, 9 times out of 10, either one or two things is going to happen. One, they're going to die first, especially in horror, or they are going to be there to save the white counterpart. Um, one of the one of the examples that always makes me mad is Kelly Rowland's character in Freddy versus Jason. She literally is about to live, but decides to go back and save her white friend, and ends up dying in the process. When she could have lived if she had lived. And you know, we can argue that, you know, well, she was just being a good friend. Well, you know, sometimes you gotta let friends go. um, so, but yes, I think that even in that sense, like she was really just there to die. She was never meant to actually live, and that's how a lot of minority characters are in horror movies. Is that they are there to be a sacrificial lamb of sorts, for other people. So, like I said, the talking character basically functions as, you know, just here for diversity's sake. The token, like I said, the token character has no real agency of their own outside of the main character. And token characters also kind of get broken down, especially black token characters kind of get broken down even further, because token black characters, you know, can be the best friend. They can be a confidant or a trusted advisor, or they can be a villain. And if they're the best friend, their diversity really is there to show kind of like this more aggressive, this more this more um I hate to say it like this, but there's more ethnic feel to their white counterpart. They're usually, you know, some, you know, into hip hop, and they can dance. Think Zach from Power Rangers. So yeah, and if they're the trusted confidant or advisor, then we get into the unfortunate ideas of the mammy character, or the magical Negro, the character that's there to just give advice. That's literally their point. They do nothing else. And I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. But the only thing that keeps coming to me is this skit from Keegan Michael Key and Jordan Peele from their show Key and Peele, where literally, if I don't know if you ever seen the skit, and I wish I had time to show it to you, but in the skit, there is a white guy at a desk, and he's having a hard time with his life, and in comes Keegan's character, And he is a janitor. No, he's not. He's a what is he? He's a repairman. He's a repairman. He's fixing the copier, and he starts giving the man advice. And in the middle of that, the white guy says something else, and in comes the janitor, played by Jordan Peele, and Jordan Peele begins to also give him advice. And then Jordan Peele and Keegan Michael Key turns each other, and it's basically they have like a Highlander moment where there can only be one magical Negro, and literally they turn magical. Like Keegan whistles and summons a bird that helps fight with him, and Jordan Peele starts throwing beams at him. I don't remember this exactly what happened, but I know that basically they just straight up turn magical. And then like they end up destroying each other, and Ian walks another black lady. I do not remember this woman's name, and I'm so sorry I don't remember her name. She's also a great black actress. But she comes in and she kind of gives advice as well, and the white guy's like, "Are you a magical Negro too?" And she cusses him out because they're playing on their trope of what is the magical Negro. The magical Negro is just there to give someone advice, and they're also a token character. They have no agency of their own. They don't get to grow. They don't get to change. They're literally just there to give advice. And then you also have the black person as being the villain, and this is an unfortunate dichotomy that really has been formed, like, I don't want to say since time was time, but I think the easiest kind of a way to explain this is to think about, let me see, is it, yeah, Dr. Elizabeth Ebony Elizabeth Thomas talks about in her book The Dark Fantastic, was it Dark Fantastic, The Race and Imagination from Harry Potter and Hunger Games. Talks about this idea of, well, is it her? Is it? Let me hold on. I'm going through my notes right quick. I want to make sure I'm giving just due to it, who said what. Um, Sorry, I did not have this all set up in stone as I wanted it, but I want to make sure that I am. Oh, is it? Is it? Hold on one second. All right, sorry for that pause. I needed to make sure that I was getting this right, and I actually was getting it wrong, so I'm glad I went back and looked. But no, it is from Horror Noir, by Robin Means Coleman. It is in her essay "Why We Die First," where she talks about this idea of how there's been pretty much a white flight within horror movies itself, where horror movie directors and writers, producers, what you want to say, move horror movies out of the inner cities and put them in the suburbs, because it kind of is a way to write out the black character to also, and then also you make the ghetto, the hood, the inner city its own like dark character, its own evilness. It's because no one wants to be there because there's so much crime going on. So it becomes its own evil. So you take white people out of the city, put them in the suburbs, and then start putting horror movies in the suburbs because you are less likely to interact with a black person. Therefore, black characters don't have to really be on screen. You can really get away with having that one token black character because black people don't live in the suburbs. Black people don't go camping and canoeing. So Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers, their movies don't have to have that many black people in it because black people, like I said, are in the suburbs. Black people are going camping, canoeing, and that's one of the ways Hollywood has kind of been able to skirt the line of having black characters, especially in horror movies. But then you have someone like Jordan Peele who comes along and is like, no, black people like to watch horror movies. Black people want to see themselves, even if it is a horror movie, black people want to see themselves on screen. So, we dropped that idea, or Jordan drops that idea and like puts black people front and center and Get Out and Us, and coming up with Candyman, which Candyman is also, in its original ideas, its own kind of unfortunate token, where also in Robin Cole's meme, Robin means Coleman's horror noir is also brings up the unfortunate dichotomy of what happens in the original Candyman, where basically, he's this black character who is, well, not the original Candyman, excuse me, but the dichotomy of the original Birth of a Nation, where basically, um, of course, in early movies, black people were not played by black people, but by white people in blackface. And in Birth of a Nation, there is a black, there is a black man who is basically just a savage, and he is trying to attack and take this white woman and her innocence. And this is a movie that got shown to the world, to the president showed it in the White House, and it became like this propaganda film that black people are going, or black men are going to take white women. And the unfortunate thing, coming back to Candyman, is that, like, this kind of what Candyman is that this black man terrorizes his own neighborhood just to get to this white woman. And I have not seen. I've seen, of course, like everybody else, I've only seen previews of Jordan Peele's um, Candyman. So I'm hoping that we kind of get away from that idea, because it was an unfortunate thing about Candyman. Even though once again it was able to give us a black character, but the black character, one, is evil. The black character is also um, you know going after this white woman while destroying his own neighborhood, like I said. So there we have kind of like this setup of many of these characters and how they work, um, or many of these, I guess, tokens and how they work. And you also have tokens outside of speculative fiction that I think kind of also work well. In going, excuse me, in talking about the mammy or the magical Negro. um and I know this isn't speculative, but I think it's it's worth mentioning, just the fact that like in Scandal, Kerry Washington's character Olivia Pope, like she's basically the slave mistress, the help, and the Jezebel. Like she does not, we're led to see her agency, I guess you could say, but at the same time, her agency does not. Her agency is helping the white people. Her agency is helping the white people. Her agency is being the mistress to the white president. Her agency is being the secret. Like, she is unfortunately not moved too far out of that. At least from what I've seen. Now, of course, I could be wrong, and people, could see it differently. But for a long time on that show, that is what she functioned as, and that is a level of tokenism. And then bringing this back to, especially because I want to talk about how we move away from that. And one of the things that I think about is somebody, and this is what Dr. Ebony Thomas's book Dark Fantastic talks about just this idea of how how children see and watch horror movies, and or not horror movies, watch fantasies, and you know that kind of gets stuck in them. Like, it lives with them, and something like Black Panther being seen by a minority child, being seen by a black child, and seeing that they can be the hero, plus they also see that they can be a worthwhile villain. And I think that, as much as we don't want to say, oh, you shouldn't see yourself as a villain, this is a movie where the villain made sense to be with this black character. And many people really connected, even kids really connected with the villain. They can see themselves being either or, and I think that is something that is always great. And I think it's great that we have had that moving away. And like I said, in Dr. Thomas's book, she one thing that in the part in the that I was reading that really stuck with me was just the idea that children take in what they see. And it made me think about my own childhood. You know, I've loved fantasy, sci-fi, horror since I was a kid. You know, I wanted to be Storm. I wanted to be Ganon from Star Trek. I wanted to be the Black Power Ranger. I wanted to be I wanted to be these characters. And I just remember thinking to myself that I am someone who looked beyond the idea of like if I watched a show with, you know, all white characters, I was someone that was able to see myself in the world without changing myself, without thinking that I needed to be blonde haired and blue eyed and thinking like, oh, that's the only way I get to be this person. I said to myself, why can a fat black boy from the South be a witch, be a wizard? Like, why can't I be that? Like, I never thought to myself that, you know, I had to change and be something different. And when I did see someone who was like me on screen, I was able to. That was a person I connected to. Like when I watched '90s cartoon Storm, she was who I connected to. She was who I wanted to be. When I saw Zack the Black Ranger, he was who I wanted to be. When I saw Ganon giving advice, which she was a magical Negro on the way, in Star Trek, she was who I wanted to be. Like I connected with the person who looked like me, and it's so important to allow children to see themselves on the screen so they can connect and see that they can be something better, something different, that you know, that they can imagine themselves as the hero or as the villain. And I think one of the ways that we continue to move forward from that is that we find ways to bring in Black people into fantasy, and people like Jordan Peele, Ryan Coogler, Misha Green, who did Underground and is writing Lovecraft's Country, and Nia DaCosta, who is not hosting but directing Candyman. Like being able to give these directors the chance to, as Aaron Burr says in the Hamilton musical, to be in the room where it happens. Like if people who are marginalized, people who are minorities, who are Black, are in the room where it happens, you know, great things are going to begin to happen for Black people being able to see themselves on the screen. And there's always this pushback from certain people where they'll say, oh, well, Black people don't watch this type of stuff. Well, I mean, that's kind of the equivalent of someone saying that why didn't you, somebody just come up to you and saying, why didn't you come to my birthday party? Well, I wasn't invited. If you're not going to invite someone to the table, then either they're just going to make a new table or you're just not going to get them there. So studios and producers and writers need to begin to hire more Black people to flesh out the Black stories and flesh out these Black characters in a way that becomes real, that does not put them to the side, does not make them the token, does not make them the sacrificial lamb, does not make them the mammy, the magical Negro, does not make them the Jezebel, the help, does not make them the slave mistress, makes them someone with their own agency. And I think like a movie like Attack the Block, like somebody might say, oh, well, how do we get fantasy into where Black people are? You simply drop the aliens in the hood. Like that's literally what Attack the Block did. They put aliens in the hood and they gave the characters agency. They let them be who they were. I think John Boyega did an amazing job with that when he was younger. You just get to see the characters be who they are in their actual form. And I see I'm beginning to, get close to the end of my time. So I want to at least show a scene from something, because I know I've just been talking and talking. I'm pretty sure you all have just been like, oh, I wanted to actually see something. So I want to see if I can get you something right quick. Let's see. So just to set this up right quick, this is from Attack the Block. They've already kind of encountered aliens, and now they're running away from them.
Yo, hi, Buff. There's nothing. Oh, shit! Oh, shit! Faut les quitter là, bien!
All right. So, like I said, quickly once again, like they're encountering these aliens that have literally just fallen into their laps in the hood, and they get to continue to be who they are. They don't change. They get to be the people that they are where they live. So if we want to kind of begin to bring in black people into fantasy, that's the easiest way to start. Like put the fantasy where the black people are. And I'm once again, I'm running short on time. But thinking about, I want to close with this. Thinking about something like Black Panther or even Lovecraft Country, since I want to also bring that up. These shows begin to show us what black people can be if they are allowed to be. Black Panther was a worldwide phenomenon. It showed that there is the need, the want to see black people in fantasy, and I don't know what's going to happen next with Black Panther, whether they will recast T'Challa or maybe even decide to go with the comics and let Shuri take up the mantle that she does at some point. Either would be fine with me, but this is it's definitely going to be something that needs to continue and it needs to grow. Even with Lovecraft Country putting black people in horror, and even letting them deal with that horror in a time where they're also dealing with racism, which is we're still dealing with that now. So it's not like any of this is out of the ordinary or anything like that. It is very much something that can continue and needs to grow, and it needs to the token really needs to be a thing of the past, because we black marginalized other minority characters need their own agency, need their own films, need to be the center of their own universes.
Hi, my name is Rhonda Jackson Garcia, and I would like to talk a little bit about monstrous motherhood, specifically about how haunted houses are used to represent defiled femininity. For the foundation of this examination, I will be approaching this from the aspect of examining the intersections of race and gender within the horror genre from an interdisciplinary approach, film, literary, and cultural studies. And I love this description as presented by Ohio State Press because it really is the basis of most of my work. So, horror trope origins. Horror has Gothic roots, as many of us know, but as the move was made from Gothic to contemporary horror around the late 1800s or so, we start to see some changes in the genre. The stories are infused with more of the supernatural. There's a distinct movement from Victorian virtues toward individual morality. These were very, very heavily influenced by societal fears, and this is where we see the introduction of the standard tropes and monsters that we recognize today. These tropes typically are categorized as the aberrations of nature, the results of science gone wrong, vampires, zombies, werewolves. But specifically, I'd like to talk about haunted houses as one of the evolving tropes in the horror genre. So these fears and this trope carried over from and extrapolated on the Gothic houses. In those stories, the houses were often part of the setting and they were their own character. And so the haunted house trope in contemporary horror morphed these houses into symbols of peace that were under attack. Now, many of these fears evolved from the fears of white men, which is very, very important because this affects how these stories are viewed and the lens through which they are often told. These fears spoke of a loss of control and also of the defilement of the feminine domestic sphere. So here we're relying very heavily on traditional gender roles where the domestic sphere is distinctly feminine and it is not to be breached. It is supposed to be a delicate safe haven. So motherhood as a representation of femininity. In 1976, Adrienne Rich published Of Woman Born. And Kira Williams says about the mommy myth, women, according to this myth, were incomplete without children. And good mothers devoted their entire beings, body, soul, time, and mind to their children. Of Woman Born sort of presented a depiction of the motherhood experience outside of the mommy myth. And it also provides a lens that shows us how motherhood has been domesticated. Rich says the idea of maternal power has been domesticated in transfiguring and enslaving woman. The womb, the ultimate source of this power, has historically been turned against us and itself made into a source of powerlessness. So, this powerlessness transcribes into a powerlessness of the houses that become haunted, that are unable to protect themselves from being penetrated. But this powerlessness also extends to mothers in the margins. And it is these mothers in the haunted house tropes that I would like to focus on. So, mothers in the margin, it's worth pointing out the obvious here. This ideal does not describe the lives of the vast majority of mothers. Indeed, given its clear class requirements, it is wholly unavailable to most of them. So, where are the voices of those millions of mothers who reject, resist, and redefine the maternal idea? Rich herself does express that one of the limitations of her work is that she is speaking about the motherhood experience through a lens of privilege. She does not speak a lot, in fact, just very superficially, about mothers who do not fit this ideal or mothers who exist in the margins. Two of these mothers, as depicted in horror works with haunted houses, are SETHE SUGGS from Toni Morrison's Beloved and Olivia Crane from the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House. Neither of these women represent the motherhood ideal. They experienced breakdowns that were exacerbated by the supernatural. They were made worse. Their situations were made terribly worse by living in haunted houses that whose decline, the houses' declines paralleled those of the women in sort of a symbiosis. SETHE Suggs from Beloved was a runaway slave, and Morrison based this story on the true story of Margaret Garner, who killed her child rather than see her return to slavery. So in Beloved, Morrison gives us SETHE Suggs, who already has murdered her toddler daughter. She attempted to murder her older children, but they escaped. And during this escape, they go to her mother in law's house. After all of this has been done, she takes her children to live at the mother in law's house. And this house is at first presented as a safe haven. But as soon as SETHE starts to live there, her guilt manifests in the destruction of not just this house, but her mental and physical health. 124, which is the name that the house is given in this story, at first belonged to baby Suggs, SETHE's mother in law, and the house was peaceful. It was considered to be a place where the community gathered. It was a happy place. But once baby Suggs died, the house took on the personality of SETHE. And what happened is the house became loud and spiteful. Is how the community described the house. They all knew what she had done, and they believed that the house was haunted because she was a child murderer. Once the neighbors decided that SETHE had suffered from the haunting and her guilt enough, they helped to exorcise Beloved, the ghost of her daughter, from the house. And the story specifically tells us that once again, 124 grew quiet. And this represented a broken and repentant SETHE who was released from her guilt, released from the haunting, released from her punishment. Olivia Crane, as depicted in the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House, is another mother that lives in the margins in a little bit different way. Olivia suffers from migraines and she's also very sensitive psychically. And so when the house starts to try to communicate with her, it is able to give her these messages, show her these pictures. And so Hill House shows her her adult twins dying. She showed it, the house showed her their deaths. And because she was in such despair at knowing that was their fate, she tries to kill them when they're young so that she can spare them this torture when they grow up. Um, and so throughout the series, we see the Crane's dream house start to fall apart because it is considered to be the heart of their family, as Olivia is the heart of the Crane family in reality. So as she breaks down, we see the house also breaking down. Hill House, in representing Olivia Crane, when we first see the house, we see this very detailed and embellished, strong structure. And yet some of the details are very tiny, they're fragile. And so they kind of reflect Olivia because she is not only timelessly classic, but she's very eccentric. She has these weird little quirks that everybody knows about. The dining room, she says in one of the episodes, is the heart of the house. And she describes to her daughter the way that everything flows through this heart. Well, Olivia is the heart of her family. And she actually filters the messages of Hill House, the supernatural events, filtered through Olivia to her family because she tries to protect them. And on that night that Olivia's physical body is ultimately destroyed, Hill House also starts to crumble. And so again, we see this symbiosis, we see this parallel between the defiled and broken down woman and the defiled and broken down haunted house. But I posit that SETHE and Olivia were not actually monsters. The reason why they are labeled as such, though, is mainly because they failed to protect their kids. So just like their homes failed to be safe havens for their whole families, the mothers were failures in protecting their children. But also, both of these mothers were propelled by these outside societal ills that they could not control. They were propelled by these ills to murder their children. SETHE didn't want to resign her daughter to a lifetime of slavery. The only agency that she could exercise was that of murder in order to free her daughter. And Olivia saw her children suffer from mental illness, drug addiction. She knew that no one would understand these things because the house had shown her how the children would end up. And so she really felt that to die in their innocence would have been much better than to die as adults in the throes of mental illness and drug addiction. So then, what happens when supernatural and societal ills are catalysts to this monstrosity? Well, Athlete Jeremiah tells us in Monstrous Mothers, like rich then, Morrison is concerned with how individuals are interpolated by institutions in violent and oppressive ways, and with maternal mother as a desperate reaction to this interpolation. Jeremiah's main argument here helps to frame this discussion about centering the monstrous in horror. It leads to the question, can we really label Olivia Crane and SETHE SUGGS monstrous without even acknowledging the circumstances that led to their actions? Without the despair that was born from Hillhouse's revelation of the twins' future deaths, Olivia wouldn't have tried to kill them. She would have remained the loving mother. Her children would have grown up. They probably still would have died, but she wouldn't have known that that was going to happen. So she wouldn't have had any motivation to try to kill them as babies. Um, Slavery was such a hopeless institution and circumstance that Sethi did not have any agency. She had no freedom, no choices, except the choice to actually commit matricide. This was a choice that Sethi made. She made it well understanding that she could be punished for it, and she deemed the punishment worth freeing her daughter through death from the eternal bondage of slavery. So these broken women, as well as their supernaturally penetrated homes, they were all defenseless from the outside influences. Hill House could not stop the ghost from haunting it. 124 could not stop Beloved from haunting it and penetrating it so fully, just as these mothers could not protect their families fully from those outside ills. And how is this relevant to the horror genre? Well, first of all, when creating works of horror, creators could actually label these society ills or society itself as the actual monsters rather than pinning the label on mothers who are just trying to live within those structures. Can you imagine that slavery is the monster, that the stigma of mental illness and drug abuse is the actual monster, not the people who suffer from these things? Um, Also, the horror genre would do well to consider the real life horrors and fears of mothers in the margins as fitting squarely within the genre. As it stands, a lot of feedback on horror that centers fears that women have, fears that people of color have, fears that disabled people have, fears that the LBGT community has. Very often, reviewers of these types of works will say that that's not horror, that these works don't fit into the genre. Or worse, these are just social justice warriors masquerading as their beloved horror. But why can these fears on their own not be sufficient to propel actual horror? Because it is actual horror to large groups of people, even if not to the dominant group of people. And this might actually serve the genre better than comparing defiled domesticity and femininity with these monstrous mothers. This comparison does not help these poor mothers who really need support as opposed to ostracism. This would also, though, doing these things in the genre would also allow us to create truly monstrous mothers, mothers who really are terrible, who are evil. And that would free them and give those characters agency and give those characters nuance to be real monsters, as opposed to simply being failed mothers or simply being women who could not be feminine. Can you imagine the possibilities if these monsters and if these works of horror were given more nuance than they are now. So that is the end of my talking about monstrous motherhood and mothers in the margin as compared to horror houses. If talking about and analyzing horror is your thing, if this is something you like to do, then maybe you could reach out to me and we can talk and analyze together. This is what I do for fun. Again, I'm Rhonda Jackson Garcia. I can be reached at the email address horrorblackademic@gmail.com. And I can also be reached on Twitter at rjacksonjoseph. Thank you.